Welcome to the INFOWARS Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Thursday, May 28th, 2015. Here are our top stories.
Tonight, why the elites want more social disorder. Then, what's the end game for armed robotics? And the military ships anthrax to 9 states. That's next on the INFOWARS Nightly News.
I love Obama! Yeah! Yeah! Terrorist, your game is...
There's no question that the elite want to establish control over everything in the entire world. The question is, how will they do it? Will it be an economic collapse? Will it be a massive pandemic? Will it be a rise of killer robots that cannot be controlled? Tonight we're going to look at why the elite want to create more social disorder. This is an article from Paul Joseph Watson. He says authoritarianism needs to be rebranded in the minds of the public. And we're going to see, so does the value of human life. We're going to cover that next. But first he says this about what's coming this summer. He says 96% of Americans believe the U.S. will witness more Baltimore-style riots this summer. The elites know the riots are coming because to a large extent, their policies have created the environment for them. That would be wealth inequality, which has proven to cause social unrest, is at its worst since before World War II. Wealth inequality, he points out, isn't caused by a failure of capitalism. It's caused by catastrophic Keynesian central bank policies that have instituted endless money printing and worldwide inflation. And as we pointed out earlier in this week, we have reports from HSBC as well as from Goldman Sachs saying this is something that is going to result in a kind of Titanic sinking of the economy. And there's no lifeboats because we don't have any more to give in terms of economic manipulation. The tools of Keynesianism have come to the end of the line. They were basically a false high. They've been sustaining the world economy for a very long time, and the crash is going to be very hard when we come back to reality. He goes on to point out that with religion, family, and social mobility all declining in influence, lifestyles built around the acquisition of products will become harder to maintain as the economic environment worsens. In other words, if you're going to define your life by your material gain, by what you have, that the guy with the most toys wins when he dies, that's going to come down to a very empty, shallow future for many people because that cannot be sustained any longer. Now, what's happening, as he points out, is a massive awakening, mainly because of free speech and the internet. In efforts to pull this down, the elite are doing everything they can to divide and conquer us and to accelerate this decline. Whatever the mechanism, they're looking to create wars, they're looking for economic collapse. They see this thing on the horizon, and of course, they are the ones who are causing it. We need to understand as they try to divide us into a kind of tribalism, they're using language that is geared towards heightening racism, not taking it down. They're also talking about speciesism. What's behind this? This is all about devaluing us as individual humans. This is something that's been going on for a very long time. There's a trial that's going on today in New York. It started yesterday, looking at the human rights of a couple of chimpanzees at Stony Brook University in New York. Now, in the coverage of this trial, there were 3 op-ed pieces in Wired magazine yesterday talking about the necessity of treating chimpanzees as humans, giving them human rights. Never mind that humans are having their rights stripped from them at an increasing rate across the board. No, we have to give human rights to chimpanzees. I'm all for treating animals humanely. I think it's very important that we not treat animals in an inhumane way. One of the characteristics of serial killers is that they tortured animals, usually as a child. So it's very important to have compassionate treatment of other creatures. Nevertheless, they are not human. What is behind this? This speciesism that Peter Singer talks about. This is about creating a kind of self-loathing for the entire human race. They have to have a devaluation of human life, just as Hitler needed to talk about the Auslander, the foreigner, the Jew within their midst before they began World War II. They had to have an enemy. They had to devalue human life. We see that coming at us today. Look at this story. This is coming from New York. This is Stony Brook University. On April 20th, Justice Barbara Jaffe of the Manhattan Supreme Court created quite a stir when she put out an order to show cause and a writ of habeas corpus. It went through the press. Look, a judge has recognized human rights of chimpanzees. She quickly took that out and removed the writ of habeas corpus from that. Now they had a trial that began yesterday, another hearing. They say what the order does is to require the university to show cause for holding the chimpanzees. They argue that chimpanzees are legal persons with a right to bodily liberty. Bodily liberty, think about that. You and I are having our liberties removed constantly. We're being treated like inventory, like cattle on the streets of our cities when we travel at the airports. Nevertheless, we're going to elevate chimpanzees. It's not about elevating the treatment of animals as much as it is about destroying the value of human life. Now, Peter Singer points out that in 1993, he and Cavallari founded the Great Ape Project, an organization that he says was intended to gain for our fellow great apes the rights to life, liberty, and protection from torture. We can't even get protection from torture for people that the CIA targets. How about doing some things for humans before we start on this speciesism? And he says the purpose of this project, the Great Ape Project, was to include apes within what he called the community of equals. That is, the community of those as recognized as having basic rights. Well, that sounds very noble, doesn't it? Until you understand who Peter Singer really is. He's a so-called ethicist of an Ivy League school, and there's a tracing of his past comments about human beings on the site ERLB, looking at ethics from a religious standpoint. And they point out that there's been a long progression. If we go back to Charles Darwin, who came up with the theory of evolution, look at his cousin Francis Galton, who essentially applied that to a new field where he coined the term eugenics. Then from there, we go to the Scopes trials, where Clarence Darrow says, we need to chloroform unfit children. He said after that's not part of the Scopes trial, but he is on record as saying, chloroform the unfit children, show them the same mercy that is shown to beasts that are no longer fit to live. Then, of course, we had Margaret Sanger, who created Planned Parenthood, expressly for the purpose of eugenics, to extinguish people that she thought of as animals, people that she did not think of as equals. That kind of elitist eugenicism that took place and is still there at Planned Parenthood. That's why we had the demonstration that all Black lives matter at the Planned Parenthood Center in Austin last week. But let's go from Margaret Sanger to Peter Singer, who is still writing op-ed pieces talking about human beings. This is what he had to say about children who suffered with Down syndrome. He says the quality of life of someone with Down syndrome is below the standard at which medical treatment to sustain the life of an infant becomes obligatory. In other words, we have no obligation to save the life of a child with Down syndrome. He gives his justification for it. He says, they are not able to play the guitar. They'll never be able to do that. They'll never develop an appreciation of science fiction. They'll never learn a foreign language or chat about the latest Woody Allen movie or be a respectable athlete, basketball player, or tennis player. That's his ethics. This is the guy who says that we need to be humane in our treatment of apes. We need to let them out of the confinement that they're in at Stony Brook University in New York. That's not about that. It's about devaluing human life. It's about treating us worse than we treat animals. It's about telling people that humans are just other animals, and by the way, they are the ones who are destroying the planet. That's the next part of it. So we need to have something that destroys all the humans. We've seen that from some people capable of developing bioweapons, speaking right here in Austin. There's another thing that, and we're going to talk about bioweapons and the latest release, the latest sloppy work, if you want to believe that it's sloppy. Perhaps it's just cavalier carelessness, but maybe there's more to it. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. But right now, I want to talk about how these same people who are holding up apes to us and saying that we need to give them rights, it's the same crowd that is also saying the same thing about robots. At the same time, we see that robots are being given the ability to kill indiscriminately, to make that decision against humans. They're telling us that we need to think about robots, especially those who become self-aware. They're preparing us for this in all the movies. whether it's Ex Machina, whether it's Chappie. We see these directors as they're promoting their recent movies telling us that we need to be prepared to accept them as co-equals. Perhaps many of them will say superior to us. And you see that in their movies, that they truly are not only intellectually and physically superior to humans, but they show them as being ethically superior to humans. This is all preparing us to devalue and cheapen human life so they can wipe it out on a grand, unprecedented scale. Now, there were a series of articles that were done in Nature magazine. Drudge picked up one of them today from Stuart Russell. His op-ed piece was, "We need to take a stand on AI weapons." And he talks about the ethics of artificial intelligence. There are other op-ed pieces there as well, and this gives you kind of an idea of the scope of the debate. Some say shape the debate, don't shy from it. Another one says we need to distribute the benefits of AI fairly. That's your socialist approach to the Terminator, the rise of the robots. And then we have one, embrace a robot in human world. Yes, they're just cuddly little toys that we can play with. But Stuart Russell gets right to the point, and he makes a very interesting revelation. He talks about the development of lethal autonomous weapon systems, LAWS. That's Pentagon talk, okay? They're talking about laws. Don't worry about martial law so much as you worry about lethal autonomous weapon systems. That's what they're creating right now. That is way beyond martial law. Turn these autonomous systems loose, give them the power and the decision-making capability of destroying humans on a grand scale, and then just sit back and watch it happen. You can always say that it was just a software glitch. We really didn't mean for that to happen. This is how we understand the difference between autonomous weapon systems and those that aren't, those that are just that are controlled remotely. He says autonomous weapon systems select and engage targets without human intervention. They become lethal when those targets become humans. Laws, lethal autonomous weapon systems, might include, for example, armed quadcopters that can search for and eliminate enemy combatants in a city, but do not include things like cruise missiles or remotely piloted drones for which humans are still making targeting decisions. And he points out, of course, that this is coming from DARPA, the usual suspects, the people who are involved in defense advanced research projects. They have something else that they're working on. Sounds very much like laws. It's called code. Collaborative operations in a denied environment. And of course, this is another justification for giving killing power to your machines and then just turning them loose in a given area. They say code aims to develop teams of autonomous aerial vehicles carrying out, quote, all steps of a strike mission to find, fix, track, target, engage, assess in situations, they say, in which enemy signal jamming makes communication with a human commander impossible. Oh, really? So that's why they have to have them there, because they're not going to be able to control these things from a distance. If there's signal jamming going on, maybe there's going to be signal jamming going on within these robots themselves. Maybe that's what they'll use to blame the robots going off on a killing spree. Finally, Stuart Russell says this. It's a very long paper. You should read the entire article. But here's the conclusion that I think you should take from this. He says, to do nothing is a vote in favor of continued development and deployment. It's not enough for us to just look at this and see what's wrong with it. He also says, in my view, overriding concern should be the probable endpoint of this technological trajectory. We've been pointing out this trajectory for a very long time. And of course, the elite have been pointing it out for a very long time as well. Zbigniew Brzezinski, in the book that he wrote, Between Two Ages, 45 years ago, the book that brought him to the attention, presumably, of David Rockefeller, because it was just in 3 years that David Rockefeller created the Trilateral Commission, put Zbigniew Brzezinski in charge of it. Zbigniew Brzezinski talked about the new technotronic era, where there will be constant surveillance of the population and constant control of that population by the government, by an elite few. That's his words, essentially. We need to understand what this trajectory is. We need to understand what is really behind mastering the human domain, as we see special forces being given biometric analysis weapons to use in the field, as we see them mapping everything about you and your movements, who you know, and your religious, political, and social dimensions onto a geographical map. This is taking everything down to the most minute control. But don't worry. All of these things are just exercises. They're for your safety. They're for emergencies. They're for use in foreign countries only. You know, just like